Thanks for coming, everybody. Some of you know me, Peter Weingard. I'm an adjunct here in the integrated marketing department, and really happy to have with us a guest who's doing some really innovative work, which I think is going to be the future of a lot of stuff that we see in marketing. Billee Howard is if you want to tell, because you have a really interesting career before this, but just to set up, the founder and CEO of Brandthro, which is this really amazing company that's doing innovative work using AI to try to understand consumer behavior in a totally new way. But let's start out. I'd love to hear a little of your background and how you got into this, because your background is
a little different.
Yeah, a whole bunch of things.
So yeah, a lot of stuff happened before Brandthro. I did study corporate communications before it was a thing at the Cork School in Ithaca. I had a minor in politics because I was supposed to be a lawyer. My grandmother was a judge, and that was a long time ago, because if I'm old, she is a lot older.
A women judge that age that's pretty.
Yeah, it was pretty big shoes to live up to, but I didn't want to do that. So I only applied to one school, and it was the one school that I knew my mother wouldn't let me go to. So I got out of being a lawyer. Net, I founded the first global strategic media group, or it's a practice to advise the C-suite on how to use brand as something in the arsenal of not only just building awareness, but actually driving business performance. And I helped some of the top CEOs in the world where I worked at Weber Shandwick, and we were a specialty practice that kind of sat on top of every industry practice group. And I traveled around the world, and I did that. And I decided in 2009, 2010, I wanted to create the first brand studio that ever existed. And I told my boss that. She said no, and I decided to leave. But I went to another agency where I wanted to flex my creative chops, but I was actually working on a book. So I got a book published while I was there, and I left agency life. And that book was a very big pivotal point in my career. It was right when the sharing economy first started. And I knew that it wasn't just going to be about Airbnb and Uber, but I knew that there would be a fundamental shift from the me to the we. And that's kind of how we've seen our world unfold since the book came out in 2015. And net, it set me on a new direction. I was consulting, I built my own brand studio, and for whatever reason, IBM took interest in the book, and they were at that time introducing Watson to more creative-minded CMOs who had no idea what Watson was, nor did I, quite frankly. But they asked me to, be an influencer and a futurist for them, because I had always used insights in my storytelling. I didn't really know that I was doing that. When I was getting a client on the cover of Fortune, I didn't know what one of the greatest keys in my arsenal was to know what was happening before the reporter knew what was happening, so that he would or she would understand why the story was relevant. Not just because it was a great company, but because it was solving a problem or being ahead of where society was moving. Net, I served as a futurist for them, and they asked me, this is a while ago, this was in 2016 or 2017. They said, what would you do with AI? And I said, after I studied it for a minute, I said, I think you could use it with other stuff. I'm not sure what the other stuff is, plus human impact, human input, to be able to somehow bring personalized storytelling with an emotional lens to scale, so that brands could tell stories to people that actually emotionally resonated in ways that actually felt personalized at the same time, in not a creepy, icky way like we see a lot of work that's being done today. I read an article the other day that 75% of Americans think that the way that brands personalize is ick. That was the headline. And they took a liking to the idea. They put us in an accelerator. I didn't want to start a company at IBM. Loved them, but wasn't the place I wanted to do that. And we set out to create Brandthro. So it's a marketing technology created by marketers to solve for what we felt were the most critical things, or a couple of the most critical things missing in a marketer's arsenal, which is really understanding who it is that you're communicating with, whether it's a customer, a consumer, or an employee, and to do that through the lens of emotion. So we're the only company in the world that uses AI as one ingredient in our cake, plus machine learning, data science, and direct human input to predict quantifiably how people are going to feel about anything that you put in front of them, whether it's marketing language, marketing content, videos, whatever, as well as the behavior that they're gonna take as a result of absorbing such content. Now, you'd think that we would only work with, brands like Equinox and things that are consumer nature, but I was just telling these folks before you got in the room, Peter and I'm sorry, Kathy, about the fact that our number one customer base right now is B2B companies who are trying to understand how do you get into the headspace of a C-suite buyer, because they're the actually spending the most emotion on decision making, because even though it's not for them, their jobs are on the line because they're purchasing things worth millions and millions of dollars. So that's hopefully a short version of how we got to where we are today.
Yeah, and let's talk a little bit about some kind of classic examples of what we mean when we're talking about consumer insights, right? And what we think consumers want by looking at the data. This is something our class was doing, right? You look at data, you have quantitative stuff about who they are, where they live, how much money they make, how much education. And then on top of that comes the insight. And the insight is the thing that unlocks a lot of, well, creativity, marketing, not just advertising. So let's talk about what some of those insights look like. An example of an insight that either, through your company now or
Let's talk about traditional insights and all the things that are wrong with them. So, and they're going to continue to be profoundly less valuable because of data privacy and literally because of the fact that you want to personalize an experience. You can't do it because you've bought information about me and what I search for or what I purchased, right? That's not supposed to. That gives you a branded directional understanding of who I am, but not a fundamental understanding. You understand the what, you don't understand the why. So purchase data has been used for the last decade. All other kinds of data has been used for the last decade, to Peter's point, to try to understand the consumer and what they're going to be doing based on what they've done in the past. What I'm saying and what our team says and what a lot of clients agree with us is they want to be able, especially in this environment, to pressure test. We use emotional lookalikes. Think about a crash test dummy for a car. We create emotional lookalikes that are real people. It's completely anonymized. It's a very big thing right now. It's called ethical data collection or well-being AI, where you're not invading your space. You're actively participating in a study. You're selecting how many primary emotions and secondary emotions you feel about something, so that we can unearth the couple of tentpole insights that are going to make you want to work or be a part of this brand, versus me saying, I know that you went to Home Depot last Saturday and you bought blue paint. Well, in the past, a lot of companies are like, oh, I'm going to sell you the brush, I'm going to sell you the moving company, I'm going to sell you this, I'm going to sell, and that's somewhat helpful, but it's really invasive if you think about it. Whereas if you ask somebody like us, a major luxury fitness brand said, why do women not want to work out in gyms anymore? Or gym, a luxury gym. And we went back to them and we said, because women are profoundly lonely and they don't want to work out by themselves. They want to work out in community. They don't just want to go to a gym for a gym. They want to go to actually be at a retreat. They want to have wellness and longevity services available to them. And they want to be a part of a community, which is very, very different than what you would be able to glean from actually just looking at a high net worth individual and the data that sits around them to try to intuit what you think that they're going to want, which quite frankly, most often they don't. You're guessing in the dark.
Right. So one example from my life is when I worked at Live Nation, we used to send out offers on the assumption that if you saw the Rolling Stones, you're probably going to like the Who because they're both classic rock bands, right? And the people who want to see Britney Spears are going to want to see, whatever, they're like pop star. And then we found that when we started doing A/B testing, that actually the randoms always outperformed the other stuff. And but it's like, why would that be? The data seems to make sense. And then when we start talking to people, you start to learn that all the exhaust of previous transactions contain in them things you don't know, right? So the reason you saw the Rolling Stones last time is because your girlfriend liked the Rolling Stones, or you happen to, I don't know, get a free ticket at work,
Or you like the Rolling Stones,
then,
like, you
now you
know,
know.
or you, I love the Doors, I can't, my husband loves Zeppelin, I don't.
Right. So, and in probing further, what we found were these sort of like insights around the motivations for going to shows that were very different than what we thought. One example I recall was that with certain kinds of teenage girls, it was the reason they were really wanted to go to concerts was to feel grown up.
Right.
They didn't care what was happening on stage. They wanted to go with a bunch of friends and say that they went to the city and saw a concert. You know, but that insight allowed us to like unlock all kinds of product things like, okay, so I could sell to this group all the dog shows that we can't sell to others because they don't care. They want to come out.
Yeah, they just wanna go.
Right, yeah, and then we built in, we had another, how insights can lead to interesting product things. We created parent rooms for a while. So like parents don't want their 14-year-old daughter going to the city by themselves to take them, like we'll give you a free ticket and you don't have to sit through the act. You could be in this back room, watch CNN and have coffee. But it was great because then it like, you know,
That sounds like a
it was like,
boring pairing.
it was like buying
At least be drinking in the parent. I certainly won't be watching CNN, yeah.
So tell me how that kind of thing now expresses itself in this more modern world where you don't have the teenage girls to talk to, but you've got some kind of digital representation of teenageness.
We actually have real live human teenagers. We just have much smaller sample sizes or whoever we're trying to reach. And because of our AI, our data science and machine learning, we're able to use sample sizes of 100 to be predictive of a population. So we're able to that's how we're able to get to understand how a C-suite tech buyer feels in 2 weeks as opposed for, you know, I'm not gonna quote our pricing, but it's not gonna take 4 months and cost $500,000, which is kind of the ballpark you're looking at when you're dealing with that level of research. So we're creating emotional lookalikes and we're literally putting inputs in front of them where they're telling us they're not open-ended questions, they're not statistics, they're selecting how they feel, and our algorithms score by segment what those emotional scores are and what their behaviors are going to be as a result of those scores.
So without, I guess, revealing clients, curious, like how have clients use this? So,
I just gave you the example of the luxury fitness player.
yeah.
They put our insights to work and they down aged the brand significantly, even though it's at a very high price point. You know, since our insights, they have a spike in Gen Z and millennials by 27% in a quarter. That's not bad from emotionally understanding what they wanted. In a B2B context, you know, we see a lot more, you know, results that they move the business in a substantive way. So B2B client, I just told you, they want to understand how to sell to a C-suite audience versus a IT buyer, because everyone's head is going to explode related to, you know, the amount of news and information and money that's been spent on AI. So when you're talking to a CEO or a CFO or even a CMO about AI, you're gonna need to speak to them in a very different way than you would a CIO or a CTO, because their foot is still on the accelerator, because their job and their mandate is to keep pushing forward and innovating, whereas everybody else is so fatigued that if you sell them more tech, they will not choose you. They will not, you don't understand them on an empathic level, and they will shut you down immediately because they're at a threshold. So it's understanding, and for this particular company, it's Fortune 500 tech company, how do you blend the legacy master brand narrative, which is all about hardcore tech, with a new consulting offering that's designed to educate the C-suite on what are the right use cases for AI, what is the ROI that's supposed to be derived from them, and then at the same time, what does the implementation look like?
You and I may have to talk after this because we have exactly this problem.
Everyone
Maybe a new
does.
customer. Maybe a new customer. have you used this internationally? And I'm curious if you've seen like really interesting differences in testing how different, geographies.
Yeah, ironically, one of our top markets, because when people used to tell me this, I'm like, I don't get it, but okay. Australia really is a good market to test innovation, it's actually, we have 5 major projects going on. Not currently in Australia, but they've been like very early adopters, and I think one of the coolest things that we've done, and I had mental illness in my family, so it spoke to me. We represented a global organization that was based out of Australia, whose mission was to decriminalize suicide globally. I had no idea, even though I had a suicide in my family, that suicide is illegal. So it's illegal to kill yourself in 45 countries. I don't really understand. I didn't understand that, but basically if you do not succeed, you go to jail. Like, I couldn't wrap my head around that, and like, I understand suicide. Net, what we aimed to do was understand how to take the emotional temperature of the world. We did 10 regions, the US was one, but many regions around the world, some in Southeast Asia, some in Australia. Net, close to the regions where suicide is illegal. And what we found universally was that nobody was aware of the extent of the global mental health crisis by feeling. They were actually surprised and saddened. So normally when you're dealing with a brand, you want them to feel joy, you want them to feel love, because that's what equates to trust. And that's what's going to move a person to positive behavior. They're going to buy, they're going to recommend, they're going to advocate. In this instance, we were like, wow, we need to press pause, because people don't understand the global mental health crisis. They're shocked. They were surprised beyond, on the bad side of surprise, that all of these people were committing suicide. So we told the client, you have to educate people on what's going on and lean into their sadness and lean into their surprise before you can bring them on a mission with you to combat the decriminalization, or to fight for the decriminalization of suicide. It was a very, very successful campaign where we worked with an agency to have a very staggered cadence to our communication, so that we educated, informed, and then ignited.
And is the mechanics of building that model that you have to find 100 people who've had suicide in their family in different countries to build the AI model to understand their feelings?
That's a great question. Just like you would do any type of research, we have as many screeners as are needed to satisfy the client requirement or what we recommend. We recommended lived, that's how it's referred to in this particular use case, lived and non-lived experience, because we wanted to compare and contrast how people would react lived, non-lived. And what was interesting is that, which I wasn't surprised about, because I've actually experienced this, where other people are on the project are just making assumptions, right? Is they thought lived people would be all excited to join more so than non-lived people, and that wasn't necessarily the case. They wanted to join, but they were so stigmatized by it because they're embarrassed by it, they're ashamed by it. They don't want to come out and put their name on a board or a digital wall and talk about it because they carry some shame. So it was a lot, very intricate situation, whereas if you just looked at hard data, that would be a minefield.
We talked a little bit, so some of the people in my class who are here will remember this when we were talking about psychographics. One question that I used to ask at an agency, we used to ask globally was, if you got into a fight at a bar, I would win, like yes or no. And it was really a question about self-confidence, but you can't say like, how confident are you about yourself, right? And you'd see vast differences in countries that were really like, kind of like out there and proud, but like, yeah, I'll win, other ones were not. So I'm interested, I guess, in, as you're building, again, you're using, and for the class, for those who joined us a little late, one of the things we're talking about that's fascinating is Billee's company is using AI to understand how different sets of people, different kinds of people, will interpret and feel the advertising, right? So when you're out building these models too, what are the kinds of questions that you're asking, or the kind of information you're trying to get into the system to, I don't know, get to these more like subtle aspects of how people feel?
Well, it's interesting that the instrument that we use, that's part of the proprietary solution, right? So we have a section that's all about go-to-market and emotional intensity. So we have a standard Likert scale, but our data science adds 2 points to every, so it's a scale of 1 to 7, but every decimal point means something. So you're asking from a brand experience point of view, what matters most to whom? And, what is the likelihood using a variety of analyses of potential for acquisition or whatever the KPI is that you're trying to look at. And the case that we just talked about was, what would it take for you to do business with a technology player who offered one technology player and consolidate? Like, that was the kind of questioning. But as far as what you're getting at,
Like other qualitative things, are they putting in words like scared or shame?
no, they're literally just selecting intensity of emotion, and then they're selecting 6 primary emotions and 12 secondary emotions, as many as they feel. So I was gonna get to that, I would win a bar fight. That's good. I mean, that's directional, right? Because, and here's what I mean by that in a hardcore use case. So I always thought that positive, negative, neutral sentiment analysis is relatively useless. I also think that they're trying to derive how somebody feels simply from an emoji on social media is also useless. As is building data dictionaries of those emojis of a segment and then selling them as a data set, it's also useless because it's directional. But it doesn't really tell you the truth, especially because people feel many, many things at any given time, and how they feel is an agile concept. It's not something that's static. Which is why we invented the idea of agile emotional customer intelligence. But the way that we solve for the accuracy issue that you're talking about is, we ask you on a primary emotional point, okay, do you feel how much love, joy, surprise, fear, anger, and sadness? And you can select as many as you want. And let's say that you love a brand's very aspirational tagline. We've seen a lot of this. People love it, they have a lot of joy about it, great. Then we invented the secondary emotions. We want you to select secondary emotions that sit beneath the primary. So for example, under love, you'd have optimism. Under fear, you might have being pensive. Under anger, you might have being disappointed, so on and so forth. And what we do is the algorithm calculates the primary emotional score on a scale of -3 to +3, and the secondary emotional score on a scale of -3 to +3. And when you look at the delta between those two emotions, if you said you love something and you're optimistic about it, that's an authentic feeling. Because I put a lot of rigor around getting to you feeling that way. Having said that, a lot of what's going on in this environment is people want aspirational messaging. They'll say they love it or they're joyful about it, but they're disappointed, apprehensive, pensive, which means there's a tremendous amount of tension there. And if you lean into that aspirational message blindly, it's a false positive.
That's an interesting point. So how do you deal with the fact that people tend to either, well, I guess it's what do they call the bias, that they tell you what they think you want to know? What's that called?
Unconscious biases?
It's a,
There's a specific.
there's a specific research term, like something bias, which is like, I'm gonna tell you what I think is the right answer.
Confirmation bias.
Confirmation
Yes.
bias, thank you. See, I told you,
Yes.
right here. Right, that's why politics and, where I always like undercount certain politicians, right? Like.
Yeah, well, this is why AI is a disaster, because it doesn't account for any of these biases.
Yeah, like, and so one example that, a friend of mine worked on was, Dove's Real Beauty campaign, right?
Mhm.
And the original iteration of that, if you remember, it had, women with lots of different, body types, and the sales of the product went down,
Mhm.
and they weren't sure like what went wrong, because all the research told us this is what people wanted. So my friend was part of the secondary group to go in and do more research. What they found out was that they had only gotten half the answer, that women had said like, I wish advertising provided more realistic representations of what women look like,
Right,
but
but,
if given the choice, I'd rather look like a monk.
right,
Right, and so they realized was like, ooh, okay, so and that's when the campaign shifted less about physical beauty than like emotional
beauty.
inner beauty, right? And
Yeah.
that was the missing insight that came from like research that only give us half the information.
Well, that's why we don't ask any open-ended questions. We just literally, it's an online experience where you're just selecting whatever we put in front of you, a video, a tagline, whatever, you're selecting however many primary emotions you feel and however many secondary emotions you feel to get at the full plurality of what has gone through your mind while you're looking at this, and then we score it.
And what else do you know about me? Oh, yeah, I will.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah, please do.
You just mentioned that people do sell database of emojis, like there's an emoji dictionary, and you said it's not of much use. Why is that so? Like, because I think coming from this generation, we talk in emojis, and I think somewhere it does represent what we're trying to say. So why did you say that it's not of much use?
I think it's a great question. What I meant by it wasn't necessarily just the actual literal emoji. What I mean is what I'm talking about that we built happens in the strategy stage before $1 is spent. So we're de-risking every dollar spent by telling you how people will feel. Whereas all the sentiment analysis, social scraping that exists now happens in what's called the customer feedback loop. After you've spent all of your money, you're going to try and extrapolate meaning from emojis, social commentary, whatever, and then go back and tell me that you really understand how the cohort feels so you can fix a campaign or a brand or whatever. It's not that it doesn't matter. It's just much more effective, in my opinion, to ask someone how they feel one-to-one and get the answer.
Now, but what about, if you have access to the data that we don't have, so you work at Facebook, right? So you are running, I guess ostensibly, the world's largest 24/7 focus group, right? With, I don't know, how many users do they have? A billion?
Billions.
A billion in all these different countries?
Till the antitrust, it will say.
Yeah, you're right. Well, so I know, so there was a piece called The Trust Engineers years ago where they were talking to the folks who were like conducting experiments unbeknownst to the users. And adjusting their feeds to see if they can make them happy or make them sad, and they were able to improve that. So is there capacity at some of the folks who are sitting on huge amounts of consumer data to do similar kinds of work, you know? And say, like, I could look at billion people, get this brand in front of them and tell you kind of what they're feeling and tell you. Like,
I think it depends on the use case. Listen, I think generative AI, for example, left unchecked is pretty much okay, because you're trying to ultimately enhance productivity, right? So you want to make more creative assets, and that's fine, because it's helping you to do that. I would say that if you're the seeds of that tree, as we talked about when we were talking about this session, are not informed by the right type of data like we're talking about, and you build those insights off of synthetic data or data that's large language models that are basically doing the kind of stuff I talked about earlier.
what about Facebook? Just as an example.
I don't think that the data that people get off of Facebook, I think it's been what's been available to date. I think it's creepy. I think most people find it creepy that they're on their phone. And then all of a sudden they're talking to their best friend about a certain, pair of sneakers. And then the next day you're like, here's the sneakers. That's gross. That's not really what people.
I mean, as a research vehicle.
Listen, it depends what you're trying to accomplish. I'm trying to accomplish making a brand function and behave like a human being, because that's in essence what people want. They want a brand to engage with them in a way that feels comfortable, but not gross. They want them to be empathetic, but not too invasive. And you can use a multitude of techniques like large language models, like sentiment analysis, like social scraping, like data dictionaries to do what people have done to date. But I would argue back that if all of those means are so effective, then why did this quote, the stat that I cited at the beginning of the conversation, there was an article that came out yesterday, and I don't remember, that it was a marketing trade magazine that said 75% of people in America find brand personalization icky. So something must be broken if that's the case. No one has achieved personalization at scale.
Right, okay. So give me an example of how, so the brand presents itself as an emotional person, right? Tailored towards a particular audience. So what would be like copy tuning for a person to make sure the words are right? Like, what are some examples of like, what's the output?
It's all different. We just did a global rebrand of a asset management firm in 5 countries. And that's not a little tiny topic. And it's also with very, it's a little bit boring subject matter. But we're trying to make institutional investors and intermediaries feel that they can trust this global asset management company in ways that they can't trust the 9 other people who say they do exactly the same thing. So this sea of sameness differentiation through emotion is a really big deal.
Yeah, but give me an example of like, I know you can't reveal clients necessarily, but like, what would be an example of like, what came out of this that helped it become more?
I'll give you an example. A client hired, that was a client, the existing client asked us to take their brand temperature. We have an API where you just put in brand content and it's based off of the Ocean model personality taxonomy. It's a model, it's the most highly regarded model for assessing a personality, let alone a brand personality. It's based off of 5 characteristics: openness, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, and neuroticism. So we put her brand in, the CMO's brand in, and it came out as, not surprising, that they were somewhat innovative, extremely focused on themselves, and the least customer-centric that you could possibly imagine. Plus, they were not focused on results, and they had very low levels of trust. So she was like, wow. So we worked with her during the pandemic they were a B2B tech company that serviced retail, hospitality, and banking. And they really leaned into repositioning themselves as the partner to helping retailers save retail during COVID. Their technology was a partner to small business owners of the people who are providing us food during COVID, and so on and so forth. And we did a test 6 months afterwards to assess how the brand personality performed. We realized that it had shifted. We pulled together a campaign with her, we executed it, and her entire brand personality shifted. And as a result of it, they got, it wasn't actually a lead gen campaign. They got 34 qualified leads and landed $120 million in extra business that they weren't anticipating.
There you go. Yeah,
Sorry.
no, you can tell.
So, in this era, like where AI is so, all brands use AI for a lot of different things. Now,
Yeah.
if I have to create a brand from scratch, and if I have to use all the AI tools possible in the world, how would that go? Like, how do you exactly build a brand in this new technology?
That's a great question. So what we like to say is, what we're talking about here today is the foundation, right? So you want to get the foundation right. You want to understand who your customers are emotionally. You want to build this emotional database of understanding. You want to build your brand in a way that's emotionally optimized. And you want to have sprints that allow you, no different than if you were doing business at a tech company. You want to be able to use research and insights in a fluid fashion to build off of that base of understanding. So you're always agilely learning and understanding how your customers feel and how the world feels about your brand. Having said that, there are many AI tools that can be used to create more creative assets using generative AI, to use OpenChatGPT and prompts to give you a good first draft of a build off of what you've already built as emotionally optimized brand. So I'm not suggesting that we don't use AI. What I'm suggesting is that the use cases of it, A, are not clearly defined and are a little bit irresponsible because I've talked about it at industry events. It's called AI washing, which is no different than purpose washing or greenwashing or all the other washing that we've heard about in the last 20 years, which basically means that people are talking about something and they're not really doing anything that matters. And that's my concern.
And they're all built on the same models, so everybody's copies start to sound the same, right?
Correct. Just like, I don't know if any of you are on LinkedIn, but you probably saw it's embarrassing at a certain point. Everybody, who's an executive like Peter or myself has decided to make an action figure of themselves this week on LinkedIn.
Didn't do.
No, I didn't do it,
Missed
but
the
it's,
trend.
the first one, and then I was like, oh, I thought this guy did it, like he just did it, because he left Mondelez. I was like, oh, he's like insights man, that made sense, he's starting his own bit. Then I'm like, wait, there's But then by the time I saw the fifth one, I was like, wow. Here. But that's the problem.
Last week was all Muppets. It was.
I missed the Muppets.
That kind of leads into my question. Did you build the model in-house?
Yes.
And how did you aggregate the data to train your model on?
Our head of data, it's a great question. Our head of data science was a data architect at Citi. And he's also a physicist who studied under Stephen Hawking. So he's a lot smarter than I am. And what he was able to do was use 100 market data points to predict where the markets were going to move. And when we met him, he said, what would be the most amazing use case besides the markets of what's never in stasis? Well, that's human emotion. So he invented what's called non-equilibrium signal analysis, meaning nothing is in stasis, which is why linear ways of measuring emotion don't work because they're not up and down. So the modeling or the math for the scoring was invented by this human being, and the application for the math was built by me.
That's so cool. So do you guys personalize? I guess so if you're wanting to understand how a college student girl would think and respond to an ad, does that factor into your whole process?
Yes,
Training the model.
yeah, so for example, for a client, we took Gen Z and we broke Gen Z into 9 individual cohorts. So that we could explain that it's not a monolith, that, one slice of Gen Z is not the same as another slice of Gen Z, just like we could just say the same thing with millennials. The difference between older millennials and younger millennials is so vast that if a brand was to say, I have a millennial strategy, it would be completely wrong. Because what drives them is totally different.
And if they said they didn't have a Gen X strategy, it would be on brand for Gen Xers.
Would be on brand for that. But yeah, another thing that we were talking about is, when you do things through an emotional lens, what we're building are really, it's called emotional phenotypes, but really it's this emotional modeling that's allowing you to look at audiences and find similarities based off of how people feel. So you might find out that you and I, even though on paper, from a demographic standpoint, we have absolutely nothing in common, but if you looked at us emotionally in relation to how a brand comes to life and what most matters to you, we might be exactly the same. So a brand might sell to us in exactly the same way, but they never would have known that if they were just looking at mine and your credit card data, ever in a million years.
By the way, that book is really interesting that labeled the generations X, like with 13th generation. I don't remember what it was called, but it was a study, probably not all that accurate. It was a historian, and he was talking about how like generations tend to follow these same sort of cycles. And it's like cycles of like building, cycles of rejection, cycles of like destroying.
Well, that's why
cycles of
boomers and Gen Z, that's why there are Zoomers, that's why hacks is a big hit. There is something to it.
Yeah, and they show like, there's the history of America, so we're the 13th American generation, Gen Xers, that follow the same sort of political upheavals happen, like the late 60s looks exactly the same as like whatever it was, like 1850s with, yeah.
So do you think it is possible for a brand to target different generations and succeed in it at the same time? Because usually nowadays we have like a target audience or like just one segment that, we're gonna target Gen Z or millennials, but like not both at the same time.
You have to be able to target more than one generation at a time, or you will be out of business. You can't build an entire brand up. I mean, I'm sure there's an exception to the rule, but I'll give you an example. We were working with a major car company and we said, okay, can you tell us who are the people that you sell to? And they're like, baby boomers. And we're like, that was it. And like, can you imagine? So we were like, okay, well, that's problematic for a multitude of reasons because you're leaving, I don't know, a lot of people on the table. But if you're only selling to baby boomers, no offense, a lot of them are going to not be here soon. So when are you going to do that? Just wondering.
Right, and some brands approach different generations, different, like an insurance company would be a great example, right? Because they sell to
Yes.
like several different age groups and
Yes.
the advertising, the communications in each is very, very different.
Correct. That's a great, we had an insurance client who was trying to sell, wanted to down age the brand and have millennials buy their type of insurance. And the way that they thought was a really good idea of doing that was selling annuities to millennials. And I am obviously a little bit older than a millennial, and I didn't even know what an annuity actually was, except that I thought it was associated with death, which I was right, because it kind of has something to do with, like, I still don't know 100% what it means, but it doesn't matter.
Take a risk.
The point is, it was not a smart idea to do that, and they had already launched the brand, and we said that the number one thing that you have to do is let them know that this is for them an investment in their life. It's an annuity, it's a payout for them to live a better life, get a payout and go on a vacation, do something. It's not associated with dying, because no one is ever going to buy this product, which they didn't, but at least we helped them
I
solve.
wonder if you could flip through some classic ads back through your tools, because there was a great example of a marketer, a brand trying to down age their brand. It was Oldsmobile. You remember that? And they wanted to appeal to a younger, and they had this line, "This is not your father's Oldsmobile."
Mhm.
And I thought this was going to be great. Actually, I saw Tiffany's last year did the same thing. "This is not your mother's Tiffany," which managed to offend the older buyers. Who thought, like, what? I'll chop liver now and turn off the younger buyers. So, like, I don't want to be like my dad and stuff. And they lost both brands.
Correct.
I'd be very interesting to see, like, if you ran it through, what it would say.
I wonder. I mean, and that's why it's very tricky, and that's why the idea of master brand is so important. You need to have a master brand. So like when we break down our analysis, we have a column that says all, which means what worked, what scored the best for all. In our algorithm will tell you what is the best thing to say to everybody. And then what is the best thing to say to you, me, and you. Because you can't obviously tell a different story to every single person on a macro stage, but when you're talking to them in this supposedly personalized way, well, you have to know how to do that correctly. And that has to ladder up to the macro story, but it does need to change depending on who you're talking.
Can you expand this to things like music, tonality, visuals?
We do videos. We haven't done music yet, but we've really perfected how we display our visuals. That was part of the global wealth management firm. They had a lot of fluidity in how they wanted to talk about the brand to make it stand out and whatever. And yeah, it was, we have posters. They have people are very into different types, testing different types of creative, even though it's brand work and it's not like an ad. So it's interesting that there's all different formats.
Anybody have anything any questions?
I think there are a lot of things about emotions, and the first thing that I think about when I think about emotions is that emotions are very fleeting, right? So, I guess my question is, if you were to work with some of the brands that you have worked in the past and say, okay, well, it was great 5 years ago what we did. Does your model, for example, update with people's experiences as they go from 5 years ago to today? Because emotions can change over time as well and evolve with people's brands. So I guess my question is, if you were to work with one of your previous clients, like 5 years later, 10 years later, would you create a new model for the brand, the people they're trying to target? Or would you use the previous model having evolved over time with your brand?
Well, that's a challenge that we get a lot of the time. It's not clients of ours, but people are coming to us. They had what's called segmentation, which was their audience data, which if they're lucky, they did it every 3 years and they thought that was frequent. They'll give us that today and we'll set up an agile emotional intelligence framework where it will drive you for, let's say, a year period, maybe depending on the brand work. It's not dependent on the emotions, dependent on the work. But the model is designed to have sprints on top of it, to your point, to understand on a quarterly basis how people's feelings are changing. And we also invented a product to challenge, I don't know if you guys are familiar with the Net Promoter Score, but it's a simple question that's the brands base a lot of their future on the idea of that if I said to you, would you recommend Domino's pizza? And you said yes to me, I would consider you a huge fan of Domino's and give me a 10+ on my brand card. And that's false information. So we invented a net emotion score that allows you to, we deconstruct the brand experience, quality, value in a way that it matters to me, whatever those inputs are. You tell me how you feel. I tell them how you feel, and if their stuff is working or it's not, as opposed to some random score that doesn't mean anything. That's a great question.
I bet right now, everybody's scores have become much more, I don't know, tenuous, nervous.
People are very anxious, but part of what we do with that emotion score as well is when you look at the primary emotional point of view, you're able to calculate for trust. When you look at the secondary emotional point of view, you're allowed to calculate for loyalty. And when you divide the two of those together or you average them, that's what gives you this brand love score. And it's compelling because it's actually a diagnostic that allows the brand to.
Right, my feelings towards the brand haven't changed, just my feelings towards life, maybe it's changed.
Yeah, or my feelings towards how you're delivering on quality has changed. My feelings towards, we did a net emotion score for a bank, and every single person who was under the age of 40 said that the bank was terrible at nearly everything that we asked them. They elicited fear, anger, fear and anger. So they obviously had to do a massive overhaul to be much more digital first, much more friendly in a variety of ways, and they're not hitting it out of the park right now, but they're improved somewhat.
Right, at least they know. Any thoughts?
Who do you think needs you the most? As in, which brands with your insights could grow the most or are not doing a good job as of now and could really use something like this?
That's a great question. I think B2B tech for sure. I mean, they're the majority of our clients, but really we've also worked with a lot of professional services firms. And the reason for that is I think that the more commoditized the business, the more you're selling the same exact thing, cars, same exact thing by price point, the less likelihood that you are to be able to stand out. And I hate the phrase, but I hear it because I hear it every day. Stand out in a sea of sameness, because if you're gonna spend $2 million on a consulting firm and they all are gonna tell you that you're gonna get a PowerPoint, they're gonna actually, you're gonna do this and we're gonna, whatever, they're selling you the same thing. If you're gonna spend $35,000 to $40,000 on a car, it's a Toyota, it's an Acura, whatever, you have to be in love with the brand to actually figure out, why am I gonna spend the same amount of money on car one versus car two? And in the case of B2B, who do I wanna do business with is the question.
Well, how would you apply it then to I don't know, a well-known brand, a lot of brand work, and well, like Coca-Cola,
Okay.
right? So universal, cheap, so you're not spending $30,000, you're spending $1
Mhm.
for a product. What do you think they would learn from a system like this? Somebody who's just really focused on shaping and crafting a brand for 100 years.
Well, it's a great question. I mean, I think right now, everyone's been talking about the lipstick effect that was invented by Lauder. So it's a thing in economics and marketing where when you're in times of uncertainty and recession, spending little on an item like lipstick just to give you a lift or a little bit of joy is like a thing. So, soda, Coca-Cola might fall under that category. So I'd like to understand, like, what would make you, whoever, want to drink Coke versus a lot of competitors out there that people are drinking a lot more than Coke. It's very interesting that, the amount of market share that Keurig Dr. Pepper has accrued in the last 2 years because of creativity and emotional connection and redoing all of their brands. I don't know, it probably has something to do with
That's a
that.
great one. Yeah, the CMO spoke at an event recently. He said that, first of all, they said, he was quick to admit he had nothing to do with it. He said, this is just something that the consumers started doing. And it was all that they could take credit for was listening well to
Mhm.
what consumers were already saying and then acting on that and amplifying it.
That's a great point. Like, if you ask people how they feel and what they want, that's actually customer centricity. people think that customer centricity is saying, I love you, I love you, I love you, and here's what I made and you should like it. And if you don't like it, then I'm gonna try and fix it and send it back. But it's never really doing what you like, it'll be better.
Right.
As opposed to just asking what you want in the first place and making it.
Right, yeah, I think, I like the way Seth Godin said it, he said like a lot of marketing, like in advertising is the equivalent of like walking up to the first girl you meet in a bar and asking her to marry you, and if she says no, you just walk up to the next one, will you marry me, you marry me, you marry me, and then like, we don't often try to build relationships over the long term.
Right.
Brands and consumers.
Yeah, it's a great point. I think relationship-based marketing is a thing that people talk about now, because it's the thing, it's real.
Thank you so much for coming.
Thanks for having me.
Sharing your
Appreciate it.
insights with everyone.